and welcome to our lecture on the causes of World War I. You should have the fill-in or guided notes to go along with this PowerPoint. World War I is a watershed moment in history. The war that existed after the Great War was vastly different from the one before. The causes of World War I are complex, but can best be explained by describing Europe as a powder keg waiting for a spark. To understand the causes of World War I requires an understanding of how that powder keg came to be. So, the Franco-Prussian War was from 1870 to 1871. And France was trying to stop the unification of the German states under Prussian leadership. Up until this point, Germany was not united. It was a grouping of small principalities. Prussia was the largest principality, and the Kaiser of Prussia and his advisor wanted to unify Germany under Prussian rule. France was afraid of that. It was not in favor of that, and so tried to stop that, and that is the Franco-Prussian War. Prussia and the German coalition defeated France, marched into Paris, and crowned the King of Prussia, Wilhelm I, as the new German emperor, or Kaiser Wilhelm I, in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. So things are not going well for France. The man responsible for the victory was Otto von Bismarck. He'd become the Chancellor of Germany in 1871. This is the crowning of the Kaiser. German states in 1789, so this is before the unification. 1871 to 1918, this is the German Empire. France was humiliated by this all happening, especially the crowning of the Kaiser in their very own Versailles Palace. So France was humiliated and forced to pay war reparations. They also lost the territory of Alsace-Lorraine and the city of Strasbourg to the new German Empire. The desire for revenge would be strong in France and contribute to the desire for war with Germany in World War I. In France, children were still taught in school to not forget the lost provinces, which were colored in black on the maps. So it began early in education, the propaganda and the continued focusing on these lost territories and on what had happened in the Franco-Prussian War. Now let's turn to Russia. At the turn of the 20th century, the Russian Empire was immense. It covered 1/6 of the land surface on Earth and had a population of almost 150 million people. It had not industrialized as quickly as the other European powers, but it was starting to catch up. Some of that came about because of Peter the Great and then czars after him. But this is a map of the Russian Empire in 1913. This is during the reign of Tsar Nicholas II, Nicholas Romanov, of the famous Romanov family. They lost, despite losing a humiliating war to Japan in 1905, the general feeling across Europe, particularly in Germany, was that in a few years, Russia would be unstoppable. So everybody was kind of watching Russia and what was going on there with a cautious eye. They were afraid that Russia would wind up being unstoppable. It was growing so big. And Japan had managed to stop them, but in a few years that may not be the case. Germany felt that if a war with Russia was inevitable, it should be sooner rather than later. The longer war with Russia waited, the more powerful Russia would become. So Germany felt like it would be better to start a war or get involved in a war with Russia sooner rather than later. However, the lesser known fact is that Great Britain also feared Russian power and considered joining Germany in a war against Russia. And here I'm going to say a lot of what is going on with World War I is what I call a family feud, because Queen Victoria, who had ruled from the 1840s to 1901, had had 9 children. She had married many of those children off to other royal families throughout Europe. Those children had had children, and now World War I is really going to be a lot of her grandchildren, a lot of Queen Victoria's grandchildren fighting with each other. Her grandson, Wilhelm, is Kaiser of Germany during World War I. Her grandson, George, King George, is King of England in World War I. Her granddaughter is the Tsarina of Russia during World War I. Incidentally, the King of England is cousins with both the Kaiser of Germany and the Tsar of Russia. So it's just really mixed up. There's all these grandkids are fighting with each other. They had played together as children, and now they're fighting with each other as heads of their nations. So the diplomatic conditions in Europe in 1914 were incredibly tense. And they had been increasing for a lot of reasons. You can have 4 categories. You put these reasons in 4 different categories. The arms race, everybody was trying to have better weapons, a bigger military than the other guy. Imperialism, which we've just discussed. Nationalism, which is an intense pride in one's nation. And entangled alliances. So let's talk about the arms race. Militarism is the desire to have a strong military, and it was prevalent amongst all the European powers. And this had been the case for hundreds of years in Europe. Each European power wanted to have a strong military, partly to protect against the other European powers because they're in such close proximity to each other, but also it was a sense of pride. It was a sense of accomplishment. It showed strength. They were spurred on by the Industrial Revolution. Each country raced to get the newest and most powerful weapons. Industrialization made better, bigger, more destructive weapons possible. Overseas colonies needed to be protected, and strong militaries could do that best. Imperialism had gathered many, many, many different overseas colonies to become under the protection of many of these European nations. And so they needed larger militaries and bigger weapons and huge navies to protect these colonies as well, and to protect the resources they were getting from these colonies. Imperialism, we've just finished talking about. During the late 19th century, European nations wanted to build great empires. Each country competed against each other in this quest. And the more land an empire controlled, the more wealth and resources it had at its disposal. So they really wanted to have these colonies, to have this imperialistic reach. Great Britain, France, Germany, and Russia all wanted to increase their power and their influence. If one became too powerful, then it would become a great threat to the rest. So each one is jockeying to be the most powerful, or to at least stay equal with everybody else. It reminds me of when I walk my 2 Australian cattle dogs, and they are constantly jockeying for which one's going to be the first one, which one's going to have his or her nose out first to show that they're the dominant dog. And that's kind of what's going on in Europe with imperialism. Everybody's trying to one up the other one just to show that I'm a little bit better. I'm the dominant. I'm top dog. So this map just simply shows who owned which colonies, and you've had a similar map in your imperialism packet, so I'm going to move on. All right, alliances are another reason for the war. Nations look to protect their interests by forming alliances, and so people with nations with like interests, like needs would align with each other, or maybe just a common enemy would align with each other against somebody that they thought was getting too big. And so the idea is, if somebody attacks you, I'll come to your aid, and if somebody attacks me, you come to my aid. So it was like an obligation to be there for the other nation. The Triple Alliance was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Germany, Austria-Hungary was one empire at the time, and Italy. The Triple Entente was France, Russia, and Great Britain. And it was believed by all that no one nation would attack another because they were afraid of triggering the series of alliances. So the idea was that these alliances would keep everybody safe because nobody would want to put the alliances into play, so they would leave each other alone. And I'm sending you this PowerPoint. So there are places that tell you that there are videos there. You can actually click on that and see little short videos that deal with this if you choose. And so this is a map that shows you the alliances of the time. Those in blue are aligned with each other. Those in kind of the red or color are aligned with each other. And this is just a political cartoon that shows how the alliances work. You've got little Serbia here. It says, if you touch me, Austria is kind of overpowering Serbia. And it says, if you make me, well, then you have Russia, who's going to protect Serbia. If you hit that little fellow, so if you mess with Serbia, I'm getting involved. If you strike my friend, that's Germany, talking about Russia, because they're aligned with Russia. If you hit my friend, that's France coming in because they're in an alliance with Russia. So Germany, if you hit Russia, I'm gonna, and then you got Britain coming in from the back saying, you better not mess with it. The next reason for, or the next factor that contributes to World War I is nationalism. Nationalism is a strong devotion to one's country or culture. And this increases throughout the 19th century and becomes much more intense in the 20th century. Pride was intense in countries like France and Great Britain. And the desire for independence was strong among cultures who were ruled by foreign empires. So imperialism caused nationalistic feelings to rise in those cultures that were being subjected to imperial powers. This was most apparent in southeastern Europe. The Balkans were home to many ethnic groups trying to break free from the Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian empires. So the Ottoman Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire had taken on quite a lot of land in the Balkans, but the ethnic groups in the Balkans wanted to be their own cultures, their own nations. And so nationalistic tendencies or feelings rose up in them, and they wanted their independence, such is the case with Serbia. Serbia is an independent country where nationalism was strong. And throughout the 1800s, the Serbian people had fought in a war against the Ottoman Empire, and they had fought for their own independence. They did achieve their independence, but it was in stages. Serbian leaders had wanted to expand the borders of Serbia even farther. So now that they had gained their independence, they wanted to kind of be like the big boys, like the bigger nations, and expand their borders a little bit farther. And they wanted to unite all the Serbian people in a greater Serbia. Many ethnic Serbs remained in the borders of other lands, like the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Empire of Austria-Hungary opposed Serbian expansion, partly because it would take people out of their empire. There was a fear that different groups throughout this culturally diverse empire would demand their own freedom. So if the Serbs were allowed to kind of join in their own independent nation, then other ethnic groups would want to do the same thing. It would be a ripple effect or a domino effect. And throughout the early 20th century, tensions would rise in the region. It's going to continue to be a problem. And so you can see where the Germans are all up here around Bohemia. You've got Poles up here. I mean, people are kind of just all spread out. I mean, there's groupings of people, but you can see there's pockets of people in other places. And Austria-Hungary has all of this land. And so they've got all these different ethnic groups in the land. And so if they let the Serbs have their independence or create their own little independent nation, what are the rest of these little groups going to want to do? Just some more maps to help you get a visual of where these different places are and who's involved. This is the Balkans after the First Balkan War in 1912. Serbia has its own little nation here. But again, they want to go up into Austria-Hungary and pull some of those other Serbs into their nation. All right. So the shot heard round the world, and we thought that was just in the American Revolution, right? No, there's another one. Okay, so during this period of tension, the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand, travels to the Bosnian city of Sarajevo. He's there for a big celebration. And on June 28th, 1914, 19-year-old university student Gavrilo Princip, I'm sure I murdered his name, but assassinated the Archduke and his wife. And she happened to be pregnant at the time, his pregnant wife. He was Serbian by ethnicity, but a citizen of Austria-Hungary. So the 19-year-old was a citizen of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but he was Serbian in ethnicity. And so he actually, this is him down here, he actually is able to jump up on the sideboard of the car with his gun, fire 2 shots, one into Archduke Franz Ferdinand and one into his pregnant wife. I believe her name was Sophie. During his arrest and interrogation, he implicates a number of members of the Serbian military. Actually, it was a terrorist group called the Black Hand. July of 1914, tensions escalate rapidly. Austria-Hungary blames Serbia for the Archduke's assassination. There's a series of intense diplomatic negotiations and ultimatums that are made between the major powers. And it was in no country's interest to go to war, but events were set in motion that no nation could stop. Austria-Hungary gave some pretty harsh ultimatums to Serbia, and Serbia agreed to everything but one. And Austria-Hungary said, no dice, it's all or nothing. Austria-Hungary, after impossible demands made of Serbia, declared war on the small nation. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of the Slavic people, prepared to defend Serbia. So they started to move. They started to move towards Serbia to try and protect them. Germany had feared Russian expansion and believed that if war was to come, now was the time. So Germany uses this and declares war on Russia. Germany uses the Russian movement of the troops moving to protect Serbia as reason to declare war on Russia. Germany declares war on Russia, but Russia is allied with France. So France is going to come to Russia's aid. Germany now has to face war on 2 fronts. war with Russia to the east and France to the west. Adopting the Schieffelin Plan, Germany planned a lightning-quick attack on France. The hope was to encircle Paris and force an early French surrender. They had actually been working on this plan for a long time. Remember, they had been afraid Russia was getting too big. They wanted to protect against that. And so they had been working on this plan for quite some time. And the idea is we're going to get into France fast. We're going to surround Paris fast. We're going to get a quick French surrender, and then we can focus on Russia. Germany could turn to the east to face the larger but slower Russian army after France was out of the way. There was one problem. In order to do this, to succeed, Germany had to move through neutral Belgium. Belgium didn't have alliances with anybody. Belgium was neutral. It was not getting involved. And it had already said that. Belgium refused to allow Germany to come through Belgium to attack France. Great Britain, on the edge of joining the war because of its understanding with France. So Great Britain was kind of in an alliance with France. Not exactly, but kind of. And it was already on the verge of joining the war. They saw this attack on neutral Belgium as the final straw, and they do declare war on Germany. So Belgium is neutral. It says, no, Germany, you can't come through here to get to France, but the Schieffelin Plan was dependent upon a quick, speedy attack and defeat of France, and that meant coming through Belgium. When Belgium said no, Germany said we're coming anyway, and they invaded Belgium's soil. Belgium was supposed to be neutral. Great Britain was already thinking about getting into the war. When Germany violated Belgium's neutrality, Great Britain said that's it and declared war on Germany. Great Britain's entry into the war, along with a much quicker Russian mobilization, doomed the Schieffelin Plan, and it led to a stalemate on the Western Front. And much of World War I is a stalemate. It's a war of attrition. There's huge loss of life for the gaining of a small little piece of ground that you wind up losing a little bit later. And that's how the war continues on and on. Italy is the last member of the Triple Alliance. It declines to join its allies, stating that the agreement had been meant as a defensive alliance. And it says it's not going to get in the war because this was for defense, and you're not using it the right way. But in May of 1915, Italy does join the war, but it joins the war against Germany and Austria-Hungary. So they do get into the war, but not with their original allies. The Ottoman Empire, the once mighty Ottoman Empire, was actually in decline in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The empire had lost much of its European territories by 1913 in a series of nationalist uprisings beginning in the 19th century. So they didn't have the stronghold that they had had before. Oops. A pro-military faction had taken control of the empire in 1913, and it was led by three men known as the Three Pashas. Closer relations with the Germans, combined with a long-standing rivalry with Russia, caused the Ottomans to move towards the Central Powers. And on October 25th, 1914, the Ottoman fleet, along with two German crewed ships, carried out a surprise raid on Russian ships and ports in the Black Sea. On November 2nd, Russia declared war on the Ottoman Empire as well. November 5th, France and Great Britain declared war on the Ottoman Empire. And you can see how this just keeps going. So where is the U.S. in all of this? Well, at the onset of the war, the U.S. had declared its neutrality. President Wilson had urged Americans to be impartial in thought as well as in action. The United States had a policy of isolationism. They said, what goes on in Europe and Russia and Asia needs to stay in Europe and Russia and Asia. We're not supposed to get involved. The majority of Americans embraced the president's stance and agreed with him. So how did we wind up in the war? Well, we remained neutral until 1917. As a matter of fact, Woodrow Wilson gets reelected as president on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." But shortly after he's reelected to the presidency, he can no longer keep us out of the war. Germany's unrestricted warfare against shipping vessels in the war zone would lead to America's entry into the war. It's called unrestricted submarine warfare, and they actually sank several ships that had American citizens on it. There were several, and we'll learn more about this next year in U.S. history, but there were several warnings from the U.S. government to Germany, and for a while, Germany ceased this activity. But they realized that they could not break the British blockade of German ports, and they could not be effective in their goal of winning the war if they did not resume their unrestricted submarine warfare, which meant shooting or sinking any ship that came that they came in contact with. So the entry of the U.S. into the war would break the stalemate and lead to an Allied victory. So what are the results of the war? Well, empires would be destroyed. Germany would not have the vast amount of land, the empire that it had before. Austro-Hungary, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire would all lose land. Russia's actually not going to be in World War I until the end of World War I. They're going to start out, and then they're going to drop out of the war when the Russian or the Bolshevik Revolution happens in Russia. The Tsar Nicholas is going to have to abdicate. He's going to be deposed. Eventually, he and his entire family are going to be executed, and the communists are going to take over Russia. That's all going to happen in 1917. So right as the U.S. is getting into World War I, Russia is getting out of World War I. Partly because the Russian people are tired of sending their young men, their poor young men, to fight a war when they are still living in serf-like conditions. And millions of Russians are going to be killed in the war. People are just tired of it. And they're tired of conditions in Russia, period, and want to change. 20 million military and civilian lives would be lost, and another 21 million would be wounded. That is an entire generation of people. Europe would be bankrupt. The victors would redraw the borders of most of the world poorly and sow the seeds for the majority of the conflicts in the 20th century because, again, they did not consider nationalistic tendencies, cultures, ethnicities, any of that when they redrew the borders. Fascist and communist movements would arise across Europe out of the ashes of the destruction and within 18 years rule most of the continent. Most of Asia and the European continent is going to be ruled by communistic and socialistic nations or movements, fascist movements, within 18 years of the end. Within 18 years of the end of World War I. So World War I is a huge turning point in world history. It's where we see the beginnings of industrialized warfare. We see trench warfare. We see massive destruction of life because of the weapons of mass destruction that are developed by the Industrial Revolution. We see major conflicts not being resolved, but just the fans of those conflicts, the flames of those conflicts are just going to be fanned and continue on. And the resolution of World War I is going to actually set the stage for World War II. But we'll continue to talk about all that in the future. I hope this has helped you understand the causes of World War I, and I will see you in our next class.